Let's talk about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is the new film from Céline Sciamma, a French filmmaker who was, her last film as director was Girlhood, which Mark championed vociferously on this program, and rightly, which was this story of teenage sisterhood and solidarity in the present-day Paris banlieues. Now, this is, on the surface of things, an incredibly different film. It won Best Screenplay at Cannes. It's set in 18th century Brittany. And it tells the story of an artist called Marianne, who's played by Noémie Merlan, who is enlisted by a noblewoman, played by Valeria Golino, to paint a portrait of her daughter Eloise, who's played by Adèle Haenel. Adèle Haenel is, she was in 120 BPM, I don't know if you saw that, the Robin Campillo film, but Act Up. She was one of the activists. And she was also in the Dardenne brothers film, The Unknown Girl. She is a terrific French actress. And so she is playing this girl who has been, young woman really, who's been betrothed to an Italian nobleman. And a portrait must be painted as a kind of a wedding present to her husband-to-be. And the idea is that she refuses to sit for a formal portrait because she is clearly not enamoured with the idea of being married off to this guy. So Marianne has been enlisted to watch her covertly as a kind of a friend stroke employed companion to then spend time with her during the day and then paint this portrait in the evenings. And then so at the end of her time in the house, they will have a portrait that they can send over to her future marital home in Italy. Now, in the act of looking carefully, as an artist at her subject, Marianne looking at Eloise to try and get the measure of who she is, to capture her, to get a sense of her personality and how you can possibly capture that onto the canvas. That act of looking sort of fosters a love between the two of them. And this is, the looks are acknowledged on Eloise's part and they're reciprocated. And so completely naturally and spontaneously, this romance develops between the two women until the point that, this is kind of the creation of the painting and the creation of this relationship are kind of simultaneous acts. Now, I would say on a completely rudimentary level, this film is a total masterclass. I mean, it is impeccably directed. The two performances are the best performances. I mean, among the best performances I've seen in years.
Wow.
The way in which these two actresses work together, the way they respond to each other, they're listening to one another. You can see, I mean, it's quite an austere film in terms of its style. There's almost no music in it. When music is used on I think 2 occasions, it's unbelievably powerful. But it's by and large a fairly austere aesthetic experience to watch. But the chemistry between them is incredibly strong. And it's scripted beautifully, the way in which they will converse about things that are going on. There's really, men are completely absent from this narrative. Luana Bajrami plays the young housekeeper as well. And for vast tracts of the film, it's just these 3 characters kind of interacting in this home, almost like a kind of an extended sleepover, where they're just getting to know each other, playing card games, cooking for one another, eating. And there are other things that I'm reluctant to explain here, but other dramas that creep into the three of their existences that they have to resolve of their own accord. But what gives this story, beyond the fact that it's an incredibly well acted and beautifully shot romance, the cinematographer is Claire Mathon, who shot Stranger by the Lake, which was a very, very different film, but she's just a complete working wonders here. What gives it its power is this is a film about the female gaze. Now, this notion of the male gaze. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of conventional mode of looking that happens in cinema. And this is not to say that this is how all men watch films or how all men look at the world. But it's this sense that, cinema is inherently voyeuristic, and the way it looks at things is seeking pleasure, obsessive, it's, potentially possessive. There's no kind of reciprocality to what's going on. It can even be objectifies, and it can be non-consensual. It can be spying.
Also, it's overwhelmingly made by men.
Yeah, no, sure, of course, and that's the reason that this is cinema's dominant mode of looking. There's a really great article by Britt Marling, the actress and writer, in the New York Times recently. The article was called "I Don't Want to Be the Strong Female Lead," and basically she was talking about that even if you try to write notionally feminist stories, you end up doing them within this kind of masculine framework. And she said, even when I find myself writing stories about women rebelling against the patriarchy, it still felt like what I ended up describing was the confines of the patriarchy. So what this film does so incredibly powerfully is it moves outside of that framework. And you experience the female gaze by watching it. And the way in which the female gaze is experienced is it's the same way the portrait is painted. The gaze of the artist on the subject is met, so it's acknowledged, and it's returned. Those are three things that do not happen when you're experiencing the male gaze in films. You know, a film like Brian De Palma's Body Double, which is like the ultimate male gaze film. And my goodness, that would make a heck of a double bill with Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Is that an erotic thriller by any chance?
It is, but it's kind of an erotic thriller about voyeurism
and
about perversion. And it's a very smart, I mean, it's a very sleazy film, but it's a very smart film about being sleazy.
Right.
The fact that this gives you and like shows you through your own experience what that alternate mode of seeing is like is incredibly powerful. Even the idea that someone has to be captured on canvas in order to be presented to her husband as a gift. It's a great early scene where Valeria Golino's character talks about her own wedding portrait. She arrived in the house of her husband. The portrait was already on the wall, you know, meek, passive, staring out, you know, not necessarily engaging with the viewer. The way in which the portrait is finally painted in this. There are actually two portraits of Eloise painted. And the difference between them, because clearly Marianne's a great artist, but the first one has to be a great picture that doesn't work. And the second one has to be a great picture that does. And it's just the experience of seeing them. It's inarticulatable in words. You have to just experience these two paintings side by side. And thus tenderized by all this stuff, the ending is just a total wipeout. I mean, it's this.
Okay.
There's a back-to-back. There are three great endings, like right completely side by side, bam, bam, bam at the end. I felt like I was being like Celine Sciamma was driving over me in a cement mixer and then like reversing and then driving off again. I felt completely pulverized by this.
Okay,
in the best possible way.